am Lena, 30 years old, and until the night of my wedding, I thought my life was about to unfold like one of those beautiful stories where hardship finally gives way to peace. The chandeliers above the banquet hall gleamed like constellations, suspended in velvet darkness. The music wrapped around me like a promise, and the air smelled of roses mixed with incense. My dress clung to me like a second skin, every stitch reminding me of sacrifices and borrowed money, every sparkle whispering that I deserved happiness after years of struggle. When my new husband leaned close and whispered in my ear, "I'll be right back," his breath was warm, his tone casual, as though he was stepping out only for a glass of water. I smiled and nodded, never imagining that those 4 words would become the fracture line that split my entire existence into before and after. Minutes turned to hours. Guests began murmuring, exchanging uncertain glances, while my cheeks burned with humiliation. By midnight, the hall was nearly empty, and I stood alone beneath those glittering lights, my fingers frozen around the bouquet as if holding tighter might stop everything from collapsing. The phone in my clutch buzzed repeatedly, messages of pity, speculation, even cruel jokes. Yet not a single one was from him. By dawn, exhaustion drowned out hope, and I dragged myself back to my father's house, my veil torn at the edge, my dignity in tatters. That morning, my father sat me down at the dining table, his eyes heavy not with surprise, but with something closer to resignation, as if he had long expected this outcome. Without saying a word, he slid a thick file across the table toward me. The paper smelled faintly of ink and dust, its corners dog-eared, its weight oppressive. When I asked what it was, he looked at me with a mixture of sorrow and determination and said, "Lena, you need to know the truth. This is the real man you married." My trembling fingers hesitated before touching the file, as though the folder itself carried a charge of electricity that might burn me. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock, each second thudding in my ears like a hammer. When I finally opened it, the first page was a photocopy of an identification card, but the name was different, and so was the photograph. My chest tightened. The man I had just married was smiling in the picture, but his face seemed sharper, his eyes colder, and though it was undeniably him, the name beneath the photo read something else entirely. I whispered it aloud, tasting the unfamiliar syllables, and it felt like speaking the name of a stranger who had suddenly invaded my life. Behind that document were bank statements, medical records, rental agreements, an entire life lived in shadows, scattered across states I had never visited. My father leaned forward, his voice low, almost apologetic, as he said, "This man has been using aliases for years. Every place he leaves debts, broken families, and unanswered questions." My stomach churned, bile rising as the words crashed over me like icy waves. I remembered the way my husband had charmed my relatives, the way his laughter had filled the room during our engagement party, the gentle way he had slipped the ring onto my finger. All of it now felt staged, like an elaborate performance designed to fool me, to fool everyone. The farther I read, the more grotesque the performance became. Reports of fraud cases dismissed for lack of evidence, whispers of involvement with underground dealings, even a restraining order filed by a woman whose name I did not recognize. My hands shook so violently that one of the pages slipped to the floor, and when I bent to pick it up, I noticed a photograph clipped to the back of another sheet. It showed him with another woman, their arms wrapped around each other, a child standing between them. My breath caught, my vision blurred, and my father reached out, steadying me with a firm hand on my shoulder. "Lena," he said quietly, "he's not who you think he is. He never was." The words rang in my ears like the toll of a funeral bell, final and merciless. In that moment, the reality of my vanished groom crystallized. Not only had he abandoned me on our wedding night, but he had done so carrying a lifetime of secrets that had now become mine to unravel. I clutched the photograph until the edges dug into my skin, leaving red lines that stung as if the image itself was punishing me for believing in him. My father's voice wavered when he said, "I wanted to stop this marriage, Lena. I had doubts, but you seemed so certain, so happy. And I feared breaking your heart before it even had a chance to bloom." His regret washed over me, but it wasn't anger I felt, it was betrayal. Not just from my husband, but from the silence of everyone who might have suspected. I stared at the child in the photograph, a little boy with a crooked smile and eyes so familiar. It was like staring into a mirror of the man I thought I knew. Was he my husband's son? If so, where were they now? I flipped through the file with frantic urgency, searching for answers, each page revealing another lie layered over the last, like a house built of rotting wood disguised by fresh paint. One letter, handwritten in a scrawl I recognized as his, chilled me most of all. It was addressed to no one, unsigned, but its words suggested a plan, a departure, an escape from obligations. He considered chains. Date was recent, just weeks before our wedding. My heart pounded so hard I pressed my hand against my chest as though to contain it, but nothing could slow the storm raging inside me. My mind raced with questions. Was I simply the latest in a line of women he used to build a false image? Was I his alibi, his distraction, or his next victim? I pushed the file away as nausea surged, the room spinning in disorienting circles. My father caught my hand, his grip firm, grounding me. "You have two choices, Lena," he said, his eyes sharp despite the sorrow in them. "You can pretend this never happened, bury it like so many before you, or you can uncover the truth, every lie, every betrayal, and make him face what he's done." His words carved themselves into my soul, igniting a spark beneath the layers of shock and grief. My wedding night had already been stolen, my dignity shattered, but perhaps I could reclaim something more powerful, justice. I looked at the file again, at the life hidden behind each forged signature and doctored record, and realized that the man I loved was gone, replaced by a ghost built on deception. The only way forward was to hunt that ghost, to drag his secrets into the light, even if it meant burning myself in the process. That night I couldn't sleep. The walls of my bedroom, once a sanctuary painted in calming shades of cream and blue, now felt like a prison closing in on me. Shadows seemed longer, darker, alive with whispers of the past I had never known existed. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind against the window pane carried his voice. "I'll be right back," mocking me, haunting me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, until my restlessness became unbearable. By 2 a.m, I had the files spread across my bed like a grotesque scrapbook of deceit. I studied every line, every number, every blurred photograph, forcing myself to memorize details I could not yet comprehend. The name changes, the sudden relocations, the mysterious gaps of months where no record existed. It was a pattern, deliberate and chilling. What unsettled me most were the women's names scattered throughout. Clara, Julia, Nadia. Some were attached to rental agreements, others to legal complaints, one to a police report filed in another city. I googled them on my phone, my fingers shaking, my breath shallow. A few searches revealed nothing. Others opened news articles about fraud, missing funds, unresolved disputes. But one name, Clara, stood out. A headline read, "Single mother accuses business, partner of vanishing with savings." The article was from 3 years ago, the photograph grainy but recognizable. Standing beside the woman was the same man I had just called my husband, though then he was using another name. My stomach twisted into knots. If Clara existed, if she was still alive, then perhaps she had answers I needed. But contacting her would mean admitting the truth, aloud, that my marriage was built on lies, that I had been nothing but another pawn in his game. Dawn crept slowly across the sky, painting the curtains with pale light. But I felt no relief. Instead, I felt an urgency gnawing at me, a need to move, to act, to step out of the suffocating silence of my room. My father found me at the table again, the file open between us like a wound we couldn't close. He poured himself coffee, his eyes scanning my face. "You didn't sleep," he observed. I shook my head. "I need to find him. Or at least, find the truth." He didn't argue, didn't caution me against it. Instead, he reached into his pocket and placed a small black USB drive in my hand. "There's more," he said. "I didn't want to overwhelm you yesterday, but you should see this." My hands closed around the drive, cold metal pressing into my palm, and I realized my journey into his secrets was only just beginning. I carried the USB drive upstairs as if it were an ammo, explosive that could detonate with the slightest misstep. My laptop flickered to life, the fan humming softly, and I slid the drive into the port with a trembling hand. A folder popped open, filled with dozens of files, PDFs, audio clips, even video recordings. My breath hitched. I clicked the first video. The grainy footage showed a dimly lit motel room, the camera placed at an awkward angle, as though hidden. There he was, my husband, or rather the man I thought was my husband, speaking to someone off camera. His voice was sharper, his smile absent, his tone clipped with irritation. "We'll use her like the others," he said. "Drain what we can, then vanish before she notices." My throat closed up, bile rising, as my own wedding ring glimmered on the screen, proof that I was nothing more than a line in his cruel script. I shut the laptop abruptly, my pulse hammering, tears burning behind my eyes. For several minutes I sat in silence, fighting the urge to scream, to break everything within reach. When I finally gathered the courage, I opened another file, this one an audio recording. It was a woman's voice, trembling. "You promised me safety. You said you'd take care of us. Where is the money? Where is the truth?" His reply was calm, calculated. "You'll get what you deserve." The file ended abruptly, leaving me clutching my headphones in horror. How many lives had he destroyed? How many women had believed his lies? My father knocked on the door gently, stepping inside with a look of grim understanding. "I didn't want you to see it alone," he admitted, sitting beside me. "But you needed to know what kind of predator he is." My voice broke as I whispered, "Why me? Why did he choose me?" My father sighed deeply. "Because you're strong. Because you carry yourself with dignity. To a man like him, that isn't something to respect, it's something to exploit." His words were both comfort and curse. I wiped my eyes, forcing the tears back, my grief twisting into something sharper, harder. "Then I won't be his victim anymore," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "If he used me, I'll use the truth to destroy him." My father placed a hand over mine, nodding slowly. "Then start with Clara. She's still alive. I tracked her down months ago but didn't reach out. Maybe together you'll find the answers you're looking for." His words planted a seed of resolve. I reopened the laptop, searching for Clara again, and this time I didn't hesitate. I found an address, an old article mentioning her small shop in another city. I copied it down, my heart pounding not with fear but with the first stirrings of determination. For the first time since my wedding night, I felt a flicker of control returning, though it was fragile, like a candle flame trembling against the wind. The journey to Clara's town took nearly 4 hours by train, each minute stretched thin by the tension coiled inside me. I sat by the window, watching the landscape blur into streaks of green and brown, but my mind was trapped in a labyrinth of questions. Would Clara even speak to me? Would she slam the door in my face, seeing me as just another of his accomplices? The folder of lies weighed heavily in my bag, and I gripped it like armor, reminding myself I wasn't walking into this blind. By the time I arrived, dusk had draped the streets in copper shadows, and the town seemed almost too quiet, its silence pressing against me like a warning. Clara's shop was small, wedged between a laundromat and a closed bakery, its faded sign swinging slightly in the breeze. I hesitated at the door, my reflection staring back at me from the glass-tied eyes. Disheveled hair, a woman both broken and unyielding. When I finally stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed, startling me. The shop smelled faintly of paper and lavender. Behind the counter stood a woman with sharp cheekbones and weary eyes, her hair streaked with grey. She looked up, and in that instant, recognition flickered between us, not of each other, but of shared ruin. She studied me carefully before speaking. "You're another one, aren't you?" Her voice was not unkind, just tired, like someone who had rehearsed these words too many times. I swallowed hard and nodded. I was married to him, just days ago. Her lips tightened, her hands pausing on the register. For a moment, silence hung heavy, then she gestured toward a small table in the corner. "Sit," she said, her tone edged with resignation. "If you've come this far, you deserve the truth." My knees felt weak as I obeyed, clutching my bag like a lifeline. Clara sat opposite me, her eyes never leaving mine. "He promised me a future," she began, her voice flat. "Investments, security, a family. Instead, he emptied my savings and disappeared with everything I had. Left me with debt, collectors, and a son who still asks why his father never comes home." My heart clenched as I remembered the photograph of the little boy, the child in the picture. I whispered. Clara's eyes darkened. "Yes, he's mine. And his." She spat the last word like venom. "If you think you're the only one, Lena, you're not. He leaves trails of broken promises like breadcrumbs, but no one follows them until now." Her words pierced me, but beneath the pain was a strange sense of solidarity, a bond forged from betrayal. I reached into my bag, pulled out the file, and slid it across the table. Clara scanned the pages, her face paling as she recognized familiar patterns. When she looked up, there was fire in her eyes. "We can't let him do this again," she said firmly. "He thinks he's untouchable. It's time someone proved him wrong." For the first time, I felt less like prey and more like a hunter preparing to step into the darkness. Clara closed the shop early that evening, flipping the sign to closed, with a finality that echoed, like the slamming of a cell door. She locked the front and led me to the back room, where stacks of old boxes and ledgers were piled high, each one a remnant of a life she'd been forced to rebuild from ashes. The air smelled faintly of dust and something metallic like old coins. She pulled a chair for me, then rummaged through a battered drawer until she retrieved a shoebox. Setting it between us, she exhaled sharply before lifting the lid. Inside were scraps of her own investigation. Letters he had written, receipts with different aliases, a handful of photographs, and a small notebook filled with dates. "I kept everything," Clara explained, her voice firm but trembling underneath. "Not because I thought I'd ever get justice, but because I wanted proof that I wasn't insane, that I hadn't imagined the betrayal." I leaned forward, scanning the pages. The same patterns leapt out at me. Fake names, sudden disappearances, unexplained deposits and withdrawals. But this time, the timeline overlapped with mine. The day he proposed to me, Clara had documented him withdrawing the last of her savings in another city. The evidence aligned like puzzle pieces, horrifyingly neat. "He was with both of us at the same time," I whispered, the words tasting like poison. Clara's jaw tightened. "He's always with more than one. That's how he survives." The thought made my stomach lurch, but it also stoked the fire of resolve within me. "We have to expose him," I said, gripping the edge of the table. Clara's eyes flickered with both hope and doubt. You don't understand, Lena. I tried. I went to the police. They shrugged. Said I had no solid proof, just accusations. He's slippery. Always 2 steps ahead. Every time you think you've cornered him, he disappears. I shook my head, refusing to let the despair take root. Then we won't just accuse him. We'll build a case so airtight he can't wriggle free. We'll find every woman he's tricked, every cent he's stolen. We'll drag his ghosts into the daylight, until he has nowhere left to hide. Clara studied me in silence, her expression softening as she recognized the steel in my voice. For the first time, she smiled not with joy, but with grim acknowledgement of shared purpose. You remind me of myself, she murmured. Before he broke me. Maybe together, we can finish what I couldn't. She slid the notebook across the table. This is yours now. It's all I have. Use it well. I accepted the book with reverence, feeling its weight settle into my palm like a weapon. Outside, the night deepened, the wind rattling the windows as though warning us of the storm we were about to unleash. But for the first time since my husband vanished, I no longer felt abandoned. I felt armed, ready to step into the darkness not as a victim, but as a woman hunting for truth. The following days blurred into a rhythm of obsession. Clara and I became unlikely allies, tethered together by betrayal, spending long nights piecing through the fragments of his deceit. Her shop became our command center, the back room lit by the cold glow of a single lamp, walls plastered with printouts, and notes that mapped his trail like a twisted constellation. Red string connected names to places, bank accounts to aliases, photographs to unexplained phone numbers. It looked like something from a detective drama, except this was no fiction. It was the anatomy of my ruined life. I took shifts calling numbers I found in his records, disguising my voice, pretending to be from banks or delivery companies, anything to coax information. Most lines were disconnected, but a few led to hesitant voices, women who, after initial suspicion, admitted knowing a man who matched his description. Their stories poured out in fragments, lost savings, sudden disappearances, promises that dissolved into nothing. Each one left me both shattered and emboldened, proof that his reach extended far beyond what we imagined. Clara documented everything, her meticulous handwriting transforming chaos into order. But with every discovery came a gnawing dread. If we could trace him, then surely he would realize someone was closing in. My paranoia sharpened. I felt eyes on me in the street, footsteps too close behind, shadows stretching too long. My phone rang at odd hours, silence heavy on the other end. At first I dismissed it as coincidence, but deep down, I knew. He was watching. He wanted me to feel hunted. One evening, as Clara dozed in the corner, I scrolled through the USB drive again, determined to find something we had overlooked. That's when I discovered a hidden folder buried under layers of encrypted files. My pulse quickened as I cracked it open. Inside were scanned passports, each with his photograph but under different names, different nationalities. He wasn't just a con artist. He was a ghost with no fixed identity. Among them, one passport stood out. It had a date stamped only a week ago. Destination Istanbul. My blood chilled. He wasn't gone. He was moving again, already preparing his next stage. I shook Clara awake, thrusting the screen in front of her. Her eyes widened. If that's real, he's already planning his next escape. We don't have much time. I closed the laptop with a sharp snap, my resolve hardening. Then we have to stop him before he disappears forever. Clara's voice trembled, but her eyes burned with the same fire I felt. Then we chase him into the storm. Planning the chase felt surreal, as though I had stepped out of my own skin and into a stranger's life, one where betrayal had turned me into both detective and prey. Clara and I spent hours cross-referencing the dates in her notebook with the passport scans, tracing his movements across countries like tracking a migrating predator. Every destination lined up with a new victim, a fresh debt, or a woman left in ruins. The Istanbul stamp haunted me, glowing on the screen like a countdown clock. He wasn't running from us. He was running towards something. Another opportunity. Another target. The thought of another woman standing at an altar, waiting for him to return, filled me with a fury so consuming it steadied my trembling hands. Clara suggested we go to the police again, armed with the pile of evidence we'd gathered. But I knew what would happen. Dismissals, bureaucratic shrugs, endless forms filed away while he vanished through another airport gate. No, this had to be personal. I booked a flight under my maiden name, borrowing money I didn't have, my father's silent support resting heavy on my shoulders. When he handed me an envelope of cash, he didn't try to stop me, only said, "Don't lose yourself in the hunt, Lena. Remember who you are." His words echoed in me as I packed, but I couldn't silence the truth. Who I was had already been reshaped by him. The girl who once dreamed of love was gone. In her place stood a woman forged in betrayal, sharpened by rage. The night before we left, Clara and I sat in her shop one last time, the walls papered with his lies. She poured us each a glass of cheap wine, raising hers with a bitter smile. "To survival," she said. I clinked my glass against hers. "To justice." The liquid burned down my throat, but it lit something inside me, courage, maybe, or madness. When dawn broke, we boarded a plane that smelled of recycled air and anticipation. Two women carrying nothing but grief, evidence, and determination. As the engines roared and the ground fell away, I gripped the armrest, whispering a silent vow to the universe. I would find him. I would confront him. And I would no longer be the abandoned bride who wept beneath chandeliers. I would be the storm he never saw coming. Istanbul hit me like a wave of sound and color, a city both ancient and alive, where every street seemed to whisper secrets. Clara and I stepped out of the airport into a chaos of honking taxis, vendors shouting in Turkish, the smell of roasted chestnuts and diesel heavy in the air. For a moment, the enormity of our task pressed down on me. How could we find one man in this sprawling labyrinth? But then I remembered the folder, the passport, the date. He was here. And if he thought he could vanish into this crowd, he underestimated the fury that chased him. We checked into a small pension near Taksim Square, its narrow staircases and creaking floorboards, feeling more like a hideout than a hotel. Clara set up her laptop immediately, tapping into forums and flight trackers, her fingers moving with practiced urgency. I roamed the streets, clutching a photograph of him printed from one of the passports, asking stall owners and cafe waiters if they had seen him. Most shook their heads. Some stared at me with pity, but once, outside a smoky tea house, an old man squinted at the picture and muttered, "Yes, he comes here. Sits by the window. Always alone." My chest tightened. We were close. That night, we returned to the tea house and took a table in the back, hearts racing with every man who entered. Hours dragged on, the smell of strong tea and tobacco staining the air, until at last a figure slipped inside. My breath stopped. It was him, or at least, a version of him. The same jawline, the same eyes, though his hair was cropped shorter, his clothes rougher. He carried himself like a shadow, sliding into a corner booth without looking up. Rage surged through me, but Clara's hand gripped mine under the table, her eyes warning me to stay calm. We watched him nurse a glass of raki, his phone lighting up the shadows with messages I ached to read. Every nerve in my body screamed to confront him, to scream, to demand why. But patience was our only weapon now. When he finally stood and left, we followed at a distance through winding alleys, the city's lights casting fractured patterns across cobblestones. He moved like he belonged here, weaving through crowds with practiced ease, until he ducked into a nondescript building with a faded blue door. We lingered in the shadows, adrenaline pounding. "This is it," Clara whispered, her breath visible in the cool night air. My hands shook as I reached for the door handle, the weight of the moment pressing like 1,000 stones. Whatever lay behind that door would either break me or give me the truth I'd been chasing across borders. And for the first time since my wedding night, I felt the faintest flicker of control return to my veins. The blue door creaked open with a reluctant groan, revealing a dim staircase that smelled of dust and damp stone. Clara and I exchanged a glance before slipping inside, each step echoing too loudly, my heart beat louder still. At the top of the stairs, a single bulb flickered, casting the hallway in pulses of light and shadow. From behind one door came muffled voices, men speaking in hurried Turkish, the scrape of chairs, the clink of glasses. Clara pulled out her phone, recording everything, while I pressed my ear closer, straining to catch fragments. Then I heard his voice. That unmistakable cadence, smooth and calculated, the same voice that had once whispered vows into my ear. But here it dripped with another language, another identity, another performance. Rage surged in me, almost enough to make me burst through the door, but Clara's hand anchored me. "Wait," she mouthed. Through a crack, we glimpsed him seated at the head of a table, papers spread out, men listening intently as he outlined some scheme. My stomach twisted when I saw photographs, women's faces, smiling innocently, pinned to documents beside bank details. He was preparing to ruin more lives. Suddenly, one man pointed toward the hallway, suspicion sharp in his tone. My breath caught as chairs scraped back. Clara yanked me into a dark storage room across the hall just as footsteps approached. We pressed against crates, holding our breath as the door swung open. A flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, pausing inches from my face before sweeping away. Seconds stretched into eternity, until finally the door slammed shut and the footsteps retreated. I collapsed against the wall, lungs burning. Clara whispered, "We can't just watch anymore. We need proof that destroys him." Her eyes gleamed, with a mix of fear and determination. And in that moment I knew this was no longer just about me or Clara. It was about stopping a predator who thrived on disappearing into new lives, leaving ruin behind. My trembling turned into resolve. "Then we get the evidence tonight," I whispered. With shaking hands, Clara handed me a tiny camera she had smuggled in her bag. My heart thundered as I prepared to step back into the hall, knowing that the next few minutes could decide everything, whether I left Istanbul as a survivor or never left at all. I stepped back into the hallway, the tiny camera concealed in the folds of my jacket, every nerve stretched thin as wire. Clara stayed behind, her whispered prayers brushing against my back as I crept toward the room where his voice still carried. My hands shook, but I forced myself to move steadily, to remember that fear was exactly the chain he had wrapped around me since the night he vanished. I pushed the door open just wide enough to slip inside, my body cloaked in shadow, the men too engrossed in his presentation to notice. The camera blinked silently as I recorded the papers spread before him, documents detailing false identities, offshore accounts, and the photographs of women he had marked like prey. His voice was calm, commanding, weaving lies into promises of fortune. But I knew the truth now. I knew what he was. A predator cloaked in charm, a ghost feeding on trust. My breath hitched, and for a split second his eyes flicked to the corner. Our gazes locked. Time stopped. Recognition flared across his face, followed by something colder. Amusement. He didn't rise, didn't shout, he simply smiled, a curl of lips that mocked everything I had endured. "Lena," he said softly, like a caress turned blade. The room fell silent, the men glancing between us in confusion. My heart pounded, but I didn't run. I stepped into the light, lifting the camera higher, my voice shaking but fierce. "The world will see who you are. You won't vanish this time." His smile faltered, just enough for me to know I had struck something deeper than fear his ego. In a flash, chaos erupted. Men lunged toward me, shouts breaking the air, chairs clattering. Clara burst in behind me, wielding a heavy crate as a weapon, buying me the seconds I needed to dash into the street. The camera clutched to my chest like a lifeline. We ran through the alleys of Istanbul, chased by the echoes of his fury, until we tumbled into the safety of a police station, gasping out the evidence, the names, the crimes. For once, the law didn't dismiss me. The proof was undeniable, overwhelming. By dawn, his face was plastered across screens, his network collapsing like rotted scaffolding. And me? I stood in the morning light, bruised but unbroken, watching as the man who had whispered promises at an altar was dragged into the harsh sun of justice. I was no longer his victim, no longer the abandoned bride. I was the storm he never expected, the reckoning he could not outrun. And as I tell you this story, my voice steadier now, I ask you remember my name, remember my fight, because there are countless others still trapped in shadows. If you felt the weight of my journey, if you believe that truth can cut through the darkest lies, then stand with me. Like this story, subscribe to my voice, because together, we are louder than any whisper of betrayal. Together, we end the silence.